If you only looked at the headline that Colton Dach signed a 2-year contract with the Edmonton Oilers, it would be easy to scroll past it and think this was just another routine offseason move. But here's what I'm hearing from people around the league, and more importantly, here's how I read this situation. This isn't simply about Edmonton locking up another forward. I think this is a clear signal that the Oilers believe Colton Dach is ready to take on a much bigger role than many fans expected. In my opinion, that's the real announcement here. The contract itself is official, but what it says about Edmonton's long-term plans is where the story gets interesting. The Oilers didn't have to make this commitment. They could have waited. They could have let Dach continue fighting for his place without extending him now. Instead, they gave him a 2-year deal worth $2.4 million, carrying an average annual value of $1.2 million. That tells me this organization sees something worth investing in, even if the average fan hasn't fully noticed it yet. Here's what stands out to me. Edmonton is one of the most cap-conscious teams in the NHL. Every contract is examined from every possible angle because this is a club trying to maximize a championship window while managing elite salaries at the top of the roster. Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are the foundation of this team. Surrounding stars like that with affordable, reliable contributors isn't optional, it's essential. That's why I don't see this as just another signing. I see it as management identifying a player they believe can deliver value well beyond his cap hit. From what I've seen throughout Dach's development, his game has never been built around flashy highlight reel moments. He's the kind of player coaches appreciate because he does a lot of the difficult work that doesn't always show up on the score sheet. He's physical. He competes for loose pucks. He finishes checks. He isn't afraid to battle in front of the net. And when your team is trying to win playoff hockey games, those qualities suddenly become a lot more valuable than they might appear during the regular season. Now, does that mean Edmonton expects him to become a top-line scorer overnight? No. I don't think anyone inside the organization views him that way. Here's how I interpret this move. The Oilers believe they have a player who can become an important complementary piece. Championship teams aren't built with superstars alone. Every Stanley Cup contender needs players willing to embrace difficult minutes, create energy, pressure opposing defensemen, and wear teams down over the course of a long season. My take is that Edmonton believes Dach can grow into exactly that kind of role. One reason this story has generated attention is because of the name on the back of the jersey. Hockey fans immediately recognize the Dach surname. Colton's older brother, Kirby Dach, has established himself in the NHL, and naturally there are comparisons between the two. But from everything I've watched over the years, Colton has carved out his own identity. He isn't trying to copy anyone else's career path. He's developed into a player whose game revolves around physical engagement, relentless effort, and a willingness to earn every shift. That's something coaches tend to notice. The latest information surrounding Edmonton's offseason suggests the organization continues looking for players who can contribute without putting additional strain on the salary cap. When you're trying to contend every season, inexpensive contracts become incredibly valuable. It's no coincidence that successful organizations consistently develop players capable of outperforming their salaries. In my opinion, that's exactly what the Oilers are hoping happens here. Let's talk about the timing because I think that's important. This signing comes during an offseason where Edmonton has been balancing multiple priorities at once. The front office has been evaluating roster depth, managing contracts, and looking for ways to improve while staying within the league's financial structure. Every decision matters because one expensive mistake can limit flexibility later in the year. Against that backdrop, bringing back Colton Dach on a manageable 2-year contract feels calculated rather than automatic. Here's what I'm hearing from the broader conversation around the league. Many evaluators still believe Dach has another level to reach. Not because he's suddenly going to score 40 goals, but because young power forwards often require more time to fully develop than fans expect. Strength continues to improve. Decision-making becomes quicker. Confidence with the puck grows through experience. Those aren't dramatic overnight changes. They're gradual improvements. Sometimes that's exactly how NHL careers are built. Another reason I find this signing interesting is the confidence Edmonton is showing in its own development system. It's one thing to sign a veteran free agent with a long NHL resume. You already know what that player is. It's something entirely different to commit to a younger player because you believe his best hockey is still ahead of him. That's where I think the Oilers deserve some credit. They're not simply reacting to what Dach has already done, they're projecting what he might become. There's a significant difference between those two approaches. Whenever I evaluate offseason contracts, I always ask the same question. What problem is this move trying to solve? In this case, I think the answer is depth. Reliable depth, affordable depth, competitive depth. The Oilers know injuries happen. They know long playoff runs demand contributions from every part of the lineup. They also understand that younger players who continue developing internally can often provide more value than expensive outside additions. That's why this deal makes sense to me. It also tells me the coaching staff believes Dach has earned another opportunity to prove himself. One thing I appreciate about his journey is that it hasn't been handed to him. Like many young forwards trying to establish themselves at the professional level, he's had to work through expectations, adapt his game, and continue improving without assuming anything would be guaranteed. Those experiences matter because organizations want players who respond well when things become difficult. From what I've observed, that work ethic has become one of his biggest strengths. Of course, this contract doesn't remove the pressure. If anything, it creates a different kind of expectation. Now the challenge becomes proving Edmonton made the right decision. And that's where I think next season becomes incredibly important. Dach still has areas of his game that can improve. Greater offensive consistency would certainly help. Finishing scoring opportunities more regularly is another step. Continuing to strengthen his defensive awareness and making quicker decisions with the puck will also determine how much trust he earns from the coaching staff. None of those goals are unrealistic. In fact, they're exactly the kinds of improvements you'd expect from a player entering this stage of his career. Here's how I see the bigger picture. The Oilers aren't asking Colton Dach to become Connor McDavid. They aren't asking him to replace Leon Draisaitl or suddenly transform into the face of the franchise. What they're asking is something equally important within the structure of a championship-caliber roster. Be dependable. Win battles. Bring energy every night. Create momentum when your line jumps over the boards. Give the coaching staff another player they can trust in difficult situations. And judging by the decision to keep him in Edmonton for another 2 seasons, I'd say the organization believes he's capable of doing exactly that. The real question now isn't why the Oilers signed Colton Dach. It's whether this contract becomes the turning point where he finally establishes himself as an everyday NHL player. And that's the development I'll be watching more closely than almost anything else as training camp approaches. The more I look at this contract, the more I think it reflects Edmonton's philosophy rather than simply rewarding one player. Here's what I'm hearing from around the league. Organizations that expect to contend for the Stanley Cup don't just focus on blockbuster trades or superstar contracts. They spend just as much time identifying which young players can quietly become reliable contributors over the next 2 or 3 seasons. My take is that Colton Dach has earned the opportunity to prove he's one of those players. One thing that often gets overlooked during free agency is how difficult it is to find affordable players who already understand your organization. Every summer, teams spend millions hoping a new addition will fit into their system, their dressing room, and their style of play. Edmonton doesn't have that uncertainty with Dach. They've watched him develop, they've worked with him, they understand his strengths, and they know exactly what areas still need improvement. That's valuable information. In my opinion, that familiarity probably played a bigger role in this contract than many fans realize. Now let's talk about his style of hockey, because I think that's one of the biggest reasons the Oilers wanted him back. Colton Dach isn't the type of forward who needs the puck on his stick every shift to make an impact. His game is built around pressure. He's willing to finish checks, battle along the boards, and create space for teammates. Those are the kinds of details coaches notice, even if they don't always make the highlight shows. Think about what playoff hockey looks like. The pace increases. Time and space disappear. Every puck battle becomes important. That's exactly where players with Dach's style can become incredibly valuable. I've always believed that every championship caliber roster needs players willing to do the difficult jobs. Someone has to win battles in the corners. Someone has to stand at the top of the crease and absorb punishment. Someone has to make life uncomfortable for opposing defensemen over 60 minutes. Those aren't glamorous responsibilities, but they're often the difference between winning and losing in the postseason. Here's how I read Edmonton's decision. The Oilers aren't just paying for what Dach has already accomplished. They're investing in the possibility that he becomes one of those dependable players every contender needs. That's a very different way of looking at this signing. Another thing I find interesting is where the Oilers are as an organization. Expectations around this team remain incredibly high. With Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl leading the way, the standard isn't simply making the playoffs. The expectation is competing for the Stanley Cup every single year. When you're operating under that kind of pressure, roster decisions become much more significant. Every depth player matters. Every contract matters. Every roster spot matters. That's why I don't think Edmonton would have committed 2 more years to Dach unless management genuinely believed he could help them moving forward. Of course, this doesn't mean his job is secure. Far from it. Training camp will be another opportunity to compete. Every young player knows nothing is handed to them in the NHL. Ice time has to be earned. Trust has to be earned. A permanent roster spot has to be earned.